to zoom in on the internet. The Zoomers. So good morning and welcome to our seminar this morning. And once again, we open into that awareness of awareness. It's been quite a week here. The Jewish holidays, and then the Pope coming here as well. Such a great week. And so much energy, so much light. So as we enter into that space of the awareness, we extend it up and down through the whole body, into the field around us. We extend to the right, to the left, to the person across the room, sensing this gigantic field this morning. Pulling it into the top of the head, down through the forehead, through the face, through the throat, down into the heart, down into the belly, into the lower body. And we amplify the energy from the back of the head into the forehead, from the back of the head into the heart, to that heart essence, and from the back of the head into the lower body. And then focusing in the heart as we open into that inner heart essence, into the light. When the Pope was talking to the homeless people, he was talking about Joseph having the faith to follow the light. Considering that Jesus was homeless when he was born. So the Father had the faith to follow the light. So as we open, we'll extend to all our teachers this morning. All different traditions. To that universal place that all the great teachers come to. Now I extend to the Pope, and as he said to us, pray for me. And if you don't pray, send me good wishes. So I'll extend to him this morning on his journey here in the States. And we'll extend to all traditions as well, in that universal place that he comes from. And as we settle in to this light, following the light, Carolyn Long is going to be speaking to us about His Holiness the Pope.
Good morning. I'm honored that Rudy and Sharon asked me to make this presentation about Pope Francis. So let's begin. March 2013 saw the election of Jorge Mario Bergoglio from Argentina as the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. He was the first Pope elected outside Europe in over 1,000 years, and the first from Latin America. Immediately, he began to surprise and captivate people all over the world. First, he chose the name Francis, after the saint who was dedicated to imitating the life and work of Jesus and lived in poverty. Nobody ever thought a pope could be called Francis. Shortly after he was elected, one writer said, "Saint Francis is this iconic figure in the Catholic imagination that awakens images of the antithesis of the institutional church. An awful lot of weight to put on your shoulders right out of the gate." Pope Francis later said he chose the name out of his concern for the poor. Right after his election, when Francis stepped onto the balcony at the Vatican to greet the crowd in St. Peter's Square, he wore the white papal robes, but there were many differences from preceding popes. He wasn't wearing an ermine-trimmed cape or red velvet slippers, like Pope Benedict did. He wore his scuffed black shoes, his black plastic watch, the silver cross he's had for 20 years, rather than a gold one normally worn by the Pope. He simply said, "Buona sera," good evening, to the crowd, rather than giving an elaborate religious greeting in Latin. He asked everyone to pray for him. The next morning, he went to the simple hotel where he had been staying and paid his own bill. He rode in the bus with the other cardinals, rather than being driven in a chauffeured Mercedes limousine. Since then, he rides in a Ford Focus. He chose to live in the Vatican guest house rather than the luxurious papal apartments. This personal taste for simplicity was not new. Francis had lived a simple, ascetic lifestyle since he first became a priest. Beyond his behavior, what has been most encouraging are his pronouncements about the Church and what its role should be in the world. Before his election, the Church focused heavily on the rules, especially those regarding sexuality and the family. So when Francis immediately emphasized that the Church's purpose is to proclaim God's mercy and love, rather than to condemn sinners for not obeying the rules, it startled and thrilled people everywhere. He describes the Church as a field hospital after a battle, and says, "I dream of a church that is a mother and shepherdess. Priests must be merciful, take responsibility for the people, and accompany them like the Good Samaritan who washes, cleans, and raises up his neighbor. The structural and organizational reforms are secondary. The first reform must be the attitude." The three major topics Francis has spoken and written about are the negative consequences of runaway capitalism, especially on the poor, the migration and refugee crisis, and the environment and climate change. Emphatically, he says the Church should be a poor church for the poor. He's not opposed to capitalism per se, but calls the unfettered pursuit of money the dung of the devil. He talks of our throwaway culture, where the poor and marginalized are ignored and forgotten. And his first encyclical talks at length about the current global economic order. This past July in Bolivia, he apologized for the Church's role in Spanish colonialism in Latin America and warned of the neocolonialism of materialism, inequality, and exploitation. His first trip outside Rome in July 2013 was to Lampedusa, a small Italian island 180 miles off the coast of Africa. He learned from the news that thousands of bloated bodies regularly turned up with the tide on this island, and over the years, 25,000 Africans had died this way, attempting to escape war and oppression. There he said Mass and asked God's forgiveness for our collective disregard for such tragedies. Recently, as Syrian, Iraqi, and Afghan refugees pour into Europe, Francis said every Catholic parish in Europe should take in refugees. In his second encyclical, published in June this year, Francis, a chemist by training, warns of the effects of global warming and climate change. He wrote that humanity's unfettered pursuit of profit risks turning the earth, God's creation, into an immense pile of filth. Many hope this encyclical will influence positively the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris this December, where a first ever legally binding universal agreement by all nations on climate is the goal. Francis is speaking about these as moral issues from the perspective of a priest and pastor. But it must be said that he's an extremely adept politician. He played a big role, mostly behind the scenes, in the recent rapprochement of the United States and Cuba, hosting secret meetings in Rome and writing letters to both President Obama and President Raul Castro during the process leading up to the decision. The Pope has expressed his focus on love and mercy in many ways. Coming back from a trip to Brazil for a youth congress, a journalist asked him his view on gay priests. He said, "If someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge?" He says that whoever wishes to be great should serve, not be served. At his first Holy Thursday evening service, which is the remembrance of the Last Supper of Jesus with his apostles the night before he died, Francis didn't say Mass in the Vatican. He went to a Young Offenders Institute in Rome. To commemorate Jesus washing the feet of his apostles on the first Holy Thursday, traditionally the priest saying Mass washes the feet of other priests. Francis didn't do that. Instead, he knelt down and washed, dried, and kissed the feet of 10 young prisoners of different nationalities, including a Muslim woman. This was not new for Francis. As Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he had been washing people's feet in poor churches all over that city on Holy Thursday for many years. He's just issued a statement that annulments of marriage will be made more simple and less expensive. Until now, divorced Catholics who remarry are excommunicated unless they get an annulment of the marriage. This has been a long and expensive process till now. In August, Francis said, remarried Catholics are not at all excommunicated. He also just said that for the upcoming Jubilee Year of Mercy, priests can give absolution, meaning they can forgive women who have had an abortion, till now seen as such a terrible sin that women are excommunicated for doing so. For the next General Assembly of Bishops next month, the topic will be the family. Francis had a questionnaire distributed to parishes all over the world, asking for views on same-sex marriage, contraception, premarital sex, and divorce. A participatory action normally not done by this hierarchical church. Francis became Pope at a time of crisis in the Church, with the scandal of pedophile priests, the Church's cover-up of them over many years, the corruption within the Vatican Curia and the Bank, and priests living opulent lifestyles. Immediately, the Pope took action. He fired Cardinal Bertone, who had been Pope Benedict's Secretary of State, seen as an obstacle to reform. He continued an effort started by Benedict to make new rules of transparency on the long secretive Vatican Bank. He forced out its 2 top officials and hired consultants to examine the workings of the bank. He set up a task force of 8 cardinals to reform the Curia. And he's created a commission to advise him on how to deal with the pedophilia scandal, including preventive measures and counseling of victims. In 2014, he apologized on behalf of the Church for leaders who did not respond adequately to reports of abuse. So who is this Pope, and what has made him the way he is? He was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, December 17, 1936, to a lower middle-class Italian immigrant family in Buenos Aires, and was the oldest of 5 children. He had an uneventful childhood. When he was 5, his teacher described him as a little demon who couldn't sit still, and today he still has that restless energy. He has always loved soccer and continues to carry his membership card of his local club in Buenos Aires. His friends described him as fiercely intelligent and intensely religious. As a teenager, he liked girls and loved dancing the tango. But at 17, he had a special experience. On his way to meet his girlfriend, he passed his neighborhood church and felt an urge to go inside. There he went to confession, and during the dialogue, he asked a question about a vocation to the priesthood for the first time. A feeling came over him, and he realized he would become a priest, certain this was his deepest desire. But he kept this decision to himself, and 4 years later entered the seminary. He has always had female friends, and was influenced by 3 women in particular. He was very close to his grandmother, whom he credits as shaping his spiritual orientation. He was influenced by his second-grade teacher, a nun, who prepared him to receive his first communion. And when she was dying, he came repeatedly to visit her. And he was very close to the woman who was his supervisor when he became a chemist at 19. She was Esther Balestrino, a Paraguayan communist and atheist. She mentored him and was a major influence in his life. They maintained a friendship for many years. During the dictatorship in Argentina, her daughter disappeared, and Esther became one of the founders of the Mothers of the Disappeared. Soon after, she was abducted, tortured, and murdered by the dictatorship. Although Francis inquired repeatedly about her to military authorities, he later said he didn't do enough to save her after she disappeared. Later, Francis had her buried in a Catholic cemetery, even though she was an atheist. At age 21, he entered the seminary and joined the Jesuit order. He was influenced by young priests who advocated a theology of the people that emphasized humility, simplicity, and intimate contact with the poor and most vulnerable. This meant living among the poor and talking about them, not talking about them in the abstract. He embraced this theology, and it has guided him his entire adult life. Becoming a Jesuit takes 12 to 14 years, and he was ordained a priest when he was 32. At 36, he became director of the seminary where he had studied, and 3 months later, he became provincial, that is, the director of the Jesuit province in Argentina. Later, he'd say he was too young and didn't know enough for such a big job. At that time, there was turmoil among the Jesuits in Argentina. There were divisions in the aftermath of Vatican II in the 60s that called for the church to become more rooted in local culture. Some priests wanted to remain in teaching, and others wanted to live in poor neighborhoods as an expression of liberation theology. Liberation theology means a preferential option for the poor, but it was usually aligned with Marxism. Bergoglio rejected Marxism, and all ideologies for that matter. He also was responsible for the safety of Jesuits and worried priests living in poor neighborhoods were in danger. The Dirty War had started in Argentina, and the military junta regularly kidnapped and killed people they suspected of working against them. The junta viewed the whole Jesuit community with suspicion. 2 priests refused to come back to live in the Jesuit residence, even when Bergoglio gave them an ultimatum, and shortly thereafter they were kidnapped by the junta. Bergoglio was falsely accused of telling the military where the priests were. The priests were released several months later, but this would be an accusation that hung over Bergoglio's head for decades. Although he tried to find a middle road between the Jesuits and the military dictatorship, it was extremely difficult. He quietly helped many people escape the country, but didn't speak out against the dictatorship. While he was provincial, and later when he went back to being rector of the seminary, he made decisions on his own without consulting other priests and behaved in an authoritarian way. He enforced rules rigidly and insisted seminarians learn farming in addition to their classroom duties. The food from the crops fed poor neighborhoods near the seminary. While about half the seminarians loved and admired Bergoglio, the other half didn't. He was a very strong personality and could rarely be swayed to reconsider once he decided on something. The Jesuit community remained divided under his leadership, and finally he was removed from his job and eventually banished by the Jesuits for 2 years to Cordoba, a city 400 miles from Buenos Aires. In Cordoba, he had no portfolio and was only allowed to hear confessions. It was a period of exile. Initially, he was furious at being pushed aside. When interviewed years later, he said, "It is a dark time, when one does not see much. I prayed a lot, I read, I wrote quite a bit and lived my life. What I did in Cordoba had more to do with my inner life." He said he could have seen himself as a spiritual victim, thinking the Jesuits hurt him without any reason. But he knew he needed to stay humble, keep praying, and give God the room to work. This dark night of the soul taught Bergoglio true humility and enabled him from then on to be more merciful and kind and to serve people better. In 1992, he was appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires, and in 1998 he became Archbishop, the most powerful Catholic in Argentina. But from the time he became a bishop, and even after he became a cardinal, he carried out his duties with a minimum of fanfare, lived simply, avoided the wealthy and powerful, and had a strained relationship with the country's political leaders. He did not repeat his mistakes from his earlier life. He had learned to listen and consulted his assistant bishops and priests, inviting their views before making decisions. Many people in Buenos Aires perceived him as introverted and dour, but those in poor neighborhoods where he spent much of his free time and felt most at ease found him to be a very joyful pastor. At the conclave to elect a new pope after Benedict's resignation, many cardinals didn't know Bergoglio well. However, those who mobilized to get him elected knew he was special. His biographer described him as a once-in-a-generation combination of two qualities seldom found together. He has the political genius of a charismatic leader and the prophetic holiness of a desert saint. Just prior to the beginning of the conclave, where the voting would take place, Bergoglio gave a brief but riveting speech in which he described to the cardinals a way forward, a reform that would recall the Church to its purpose and the source of its life. For many, this speech convinced them that he was the right choice for Pope. Let us end by reflecting on the inner life of Pope Francis. He rises at 4:30 each day, meditates and prays for 2 hours before saying Mass and beginning his workday. He uses the Jesuit practice of discernment to learn where God is calling him and what the temptations and distractions are that may be keeping him from that call. This is done through hours of prayer and reflection on the most mundane of activities. Each evening, he sits in adoration of the Eucharist for an hour, and in honor of the Divine Mother, he prays 15 decades of the Rosary daily as well. Normally, when Catholics say the Rosary, they say 5 decades at one time. Lastly, he also does the Jesuit examen, or the examination, every evening. This is a review of all that he's done that day to see whether what he did was inspired by God or influenced by evil, and how he might do better the next day. He has a special devotion to Saint Thérèse de Lisieux. In the U.S., we know her as the Little Flower. She was a French nun who died at 24 and is revered by many in the Church, including clergy. In Spanish, she's known as Teresita. Francis prays to her when he has problems. The sign he receives from her when she answers his prayer is a single white rose, or a bouquet of roses, white roses that appear for him. Sometimes he finds them on his desk. Often they're delivered by a stranger, who then disappears. When he speaks of these roses, he doesn't question how they appear. And when seeing them, he often says, "Oh, Teresita has been here." He's now 78, has only one lung, and suffers from sciatica. Although he's a very active pope, he's described as not really having friends. Many people say they know him and are his friend, but he doesn't socialize. When not working, he spends his time alone, focused on his interior life. He's a combination of a mystic, an ascetic, a moral leader, and a politician. He leads by example, by his preaching, his writings, and by his behavior. The author of a biography of Francis said, after meeting the Pope, that what struck him most was the energy he gave off, a biblical blend of serenity and playful joy. If joy were a flame, you'd need to be made of asbestos not to get burned. Lastly, Pope Francis makes me think of what we do here with Rudy in going into primordial awareness and focusing on bringing our minds into our hearts. Francis is a shining example of a person whose mind is fully integrated into his heart, so that he is able to express love and wisdom every day, whatever he does. He is a great soul, and we are so blessed to have him with us here on earth. So now let's focus in on this joy as we continue in meditation. We've been in awareness now for some time. So as we finish our meditation, let us extend our love to all in this room, to our families and friends, to Pope Francis and all spiritual leaders around the world, and to all beings on our common home, the earth. We're going to finish with one last chant in honor of all the religions and spiritual traditions in the world.
me.